today, our focus, this is a tips and tricks webinar again. So remember, if you've been enjoying these before, we do go quite quickly, but don't worry too much because you can always come back and watch this video at a later time and slow it down and talk about bits and pieces. I'm slightly under the weather, so it might be a bit slower than normal, so I apologize if that is the case. But today's focus is around OneDrive, SharePoint, Forms, and Sway. So OneDrive being a document and file management system, SharePoint also being a document and file management system, but it's got a lot of other bells and whistles, and we're going to focus in on those bells and whistles a little bit today. We're going to talk about Forms, which is something that lots of people have started to use, but aren't necessarily adopting across the business. So we're going to give you some examples of why that would be a good idea. And then we're going to introduce you to Sway, or you may already know about Sway. So we're going to just show you what Sway is, because you'll see it if you go into your little app launcher. And as always, we'll point you in the direction of a few places that you can go to learn more about some of the other applications within the Microsoft Suite. And questions at the end of these, we always do Q&A. So if this is the first time you've joined us, please feel free to fire your questions into the chat on the side of this webinar. And then I will kind of scoop back round at the end and go through any of those questions. Feel free to fire as you go. And that way, obviously, if you think of something whilst I'm talking about something, stick it in the chat, and then we won't forget about it. Okay. So, right, we won't hang around. We'll try and make this as quick as possible for everybody. So let's start with OneDrive then. So OneDrive is, as I mentioned a moment ago, a file and document management solution. Lots of people ask me, why have we got OneDrive and SharePoint? Aren't they the same thing? The answer is they're fundamentally both very, very similar file systems and file management systems. For the techies amongst you, you'll know that they're basically the same thing. But there is a different use case. Okay, so imagine a bit like in the old days, we used to have home areas or My Documents, or we'd have a H drive, a network drive that was mapped to H, and that's where we stored all of our stuff. And then we probably had a shared network drive where we had a folder system in there that was maybe departmental, and you put all your department files under certain folders. And that was the purpose of really that sort of shared environment and my own personal environment. So the best way to engage with OneDrive and SharePoint is to consider OneDrive to be your own personal storage area, your home drive, your H drive, SharePoint to be that collaborative area where you store documents that you're going to work on with other members of your team or people outside your department within your wider organization. And but ultimately, they do a very, very, very similar thing. So what we're going to do to start with then is talk about OneDrive, but all of the things I'm about to show you in OneDrive, you can do inside SharePoint. So I'm not going to show you again inside SharePoint because that's a waste of everyone's time. But what we will do is, where I'm talking about kind of sharing and versioning and all this sort of stuff, all that stuff exists inside SharePoint as well. But let's dig into OneDrive. So OneDrive is obviously web-based. You've got apps and you can get it on your phone and bits and pieces as well. But it is fundamentally a file system for your documents and your data. Now you create new documents and new bits and pieces by clicking Add New at the corner. We're going to go and create a new folder here called Projects. One of the nice things about OneDrive is you can give a folder a color, which is always nice for organization purposes. All right, so I've now got a nice green folder there called Projects. And what I wanted to show you was how we can go about basically sharing that. That's always question number one. How do you share something within OneDrive? We've got two choices: share or copy link. I've clicked copy link there. And when I copy a link, it's something I can give to somebody else to get to this folder. But I get a few options. I can choose who has access to it, whether it's anybody. But two really important things to take away are this expiration date and a password. So I can choose when this link expires, and I can password protect everything inside this folder. So lots of people will try and protect documents, and they would get asked a lot, you know, how do I password protect a Word document or PDF or all this sort of stuff? Yes, you can do that with some other tools, absolutely. But it's sometimes easier to chuck it all in a folder and then just share a link to the folder and password protect folder. So what does that look like when we actually go and try it out? I'm going to copy that link, I'm going to paste it into a new tab up here. And when you go and visit that, you're going to see that screen there, okay? And it's going to ask you for that password. So I don't need to individually password protect all the documents that I'm sharing. I can just password protect the folder, and then someone's got to type a password in to be able to gain access. All right. Now, this may or may not work within your organization. Some organizations don't allow external sharing, in which case this possibly won't work. Some organizations will disable the ability for you to set a password. So again, this might not work. But if it's something that's fundamental to your business, it might be worth engaging with your IT department and understanding the risks associated with sharing out data outside your organization. All right? In most sort of scenarios, there's a valid reason to do it, certainly if you're working with other organizations and vendors and suppliers and bits and pieces like that. So two bits there really are sharing. You right click on a file, you click the three little dots, you go to share or to copy link at the top. They fundamentally do the same thing. And the takeaway really is setting an expiration link. If you're working with somebody for 3 months, put an expiration link on it in 3 months' time, and then that third party are not going to be able to have access to it after your expiration date. Okay, so passwords and sharing. Right, next one. Favorites. This is something that people don't use a lot. I've got loads and loads and loads of stuff in my OneDrive, and think about this in SharePoint as well. Lots and lots of stuff all over SharePoint. You'll see next to files and folders a little star icon. If you hover over that and click it, it goes into what's known as your favorites. Okay, and you can get to your favorites by clicking favorites in the navigation bar, and you will see all those files and documents that you use quite a lot. Lots of people will have done this inside Microsoft Word. And when you go to file open, or you might have recent files and you've got pinned the things that you've pinned. It's kind of the same thing, right? Within that environment. Important other thing to note is just that you can open documents in the browser version or in the actual desktop application. You do that just by hovering over. So if you're going to the web-based version and then opening in desktop app, then you can just do it straight from navigation now. Okay. And of course, when you want to come in and remove things from the favorites, all you do is you go and hover over that star and unclick it, or you click on the three little dots and unfavorite it. Okay, so nice way of tidying your desktop or your documents up. If you've got loads and loads of stuff, stick it in your favorites. Next one, we've got a really, really cool feature actually. So this is, if you go up to the cog in the top right corner, you can restore your OneDrive. Now, why would we want to do that? Really, let's imagine something's gone absolutely wrong. You've lost a load of data, you've done a sync and something's gone weird for those IT managers out there. What I can do is by going to a user, I can go restore OneDrive, and I can set it back to my entire OneDrive back to any point it was in the last 30 days. Okay, that's changeable, but within the last 30 days. So you can see there that 10 days ago, loads of stuff happened in this OneDrive, and I might want to revert back to exactly how it was 10 days ago, for example. Right now, this is great. Let's say you've deleted a load of files, you can't find them in a recycle bin, you don't know where they've gone. Just restore your OneDrive back, go and grab those files, pull them out. Of course, you can then restore your OneDrive back kind of forward in time again, because you can go restore it back to 1 day ago, if that makes sense. At that point, you can then just put all those files that you lost back in again. So very, very useful tool. Don't go playing with it, probably without speaking to your IT department. It's well worth a conversation with them first. They might have backups and things that are much easier to do. Because if you do revert it back to 10 days ago, you're going to lose all the stuff you did in the last 10 days. Okay, so it's really important that you don't muck around with that too much, but a really, really useful tool. It's worth saying that OneDrive is not just baked into 365. If you've got a Hotmail account, an Outlook.com account, your own personal 365, or your own personal Microsoft account, OneDrive is pretty much exactly the same between those two versions. And this Restore Your OneDrive is available inside that as well. So something to take away slightly outside of the world of work is that if you do, maybe store your photos and you back your photos up to OneDrive and things like that, and suddenly you wake up and realize they're all gone, just on a personal note, go and have a look at that restore. You might be able to pull that stuff back. All right, so an important one for you. So the last piece is really, let's focus in on probably the next thing. Rather than restoring my entire OneDrive, I might just want to look at a particular file. And we've got this tool called version history. We've done this before in previous episodes. But you can see here that I've got a file here and it's got 3 versions, version 1, version 2, and version 3. But if I wanted to roll my document back to how it was in version 1, I just click on the 3 little dots and I go restore. And what it does is it doesn't delete it, it doesn't overwrite anything, it just creates a new version. So if we just hover on that screen for a second, you can see we've got version 1, version 2, version 3, and version 4. By restoring version 1, version 4 and version 1 are exactly the same now. Okay, they're the same document. But it hasn't overwritten everything that I did. Now, this is particularly useful when you think about collaborative working. Let's say I've just spent half an hour writing a load of stuff into a Word document, and then one of my colleagues has come in, looked at it and gone, no, that's a load of rubbish, and decided to delete all the work that I've done, and they've written their own thing, but they've totally missed the brief. I'm not very happy with it, and I want to get my information back again. Okay, in the old days, we'd have had to been going back and hoping that there was a backup overnight and that we'd be able to restore that data. But in the world of the cloud and in the world of 365, When you're working in Word or any of the Office documents, you'll notice a little auto-save thing at the top corner. If that's turned on, you're typing away, it will just constantly be saving in the background, and it bunches all those saves up into effectively a version. So if you look at any document that you've got inside your OneDrive or SharePoint today, and encourage you to go and have a little look, click on the three little dots and go to version history. You'll see every single change you ever made inside that document as listed as a version history. And if you need to roll it back to how it was last year, or you need to roll it back to how it was a few weeks ago, you can just click on a particular version. It gives you the date and the time that it stored that version, and you can roll back to that. Doesn't lose all the changes in between, so you can always roll back forward again if you need to. But the point is, it's a great way of managing that. Now, if you deal with policies and processes and procedures, this is another great tool, because actually, if you're ISO accredited, for example, and you've got an auditor coming in to check that you've reviewed your documents, lots of people have a version 1 of their document, and they'll make some changes and they'll save it as version 2, and then they'll save it as version 3. You end up with a folder with 10 years worth of documents that are all the same document, bar a few words that have changed here and there. And they've got V1, V2, V3, V4 appended on the end of the file name. You don't need to do that anymore, right? Just stay with the one document. It means that when you send somebody a sharing link to that policy document, if you make a change in it, it's always up to date, all right? If you start saving it as V2, then that link's not going to work anymore, because it's a brand new document. So you've got to reshare it with everybody again. So don't need to do that. Just make the changes live inside the document, okay? And when your auditor comes in, you can literally open this screen up and go, there's all our version history. You can see that on that date, at that time, we reviewed that policy, and we agreed that it was okay, and we made a change and saved it, okay? So version history is really, really powerful. It's baked into OneDrive. It's baked into SharePoint. If you don't use it already, definitely get involved. We've done bits in the past, so I encourage you to go back and look at some of our older videos where we've really focused around version history, where we can actually compare versions and look at the differences between documents and bits and pieces like that as well. So if that's interesting, please go back and have a look at some of those videos, or reach out to us and we can come talk to you about it. So OneDrive, as I say, doesn't really change. All the things I've just shown you there within OneDrive are pretty much exactly the same inside SharePoint. And SharePoint is still a file storage place. Okay, we still put documents and files and folders, and the truth is that's what most people use it for. It's the thing that sits behind Microsoft Teams, and SharePoint has been around for an incredibly long time, is the truth, as a technology. However, it never really took off massively, and part of that was because it was considered to be quite hard to engage with, in all honesty. So you can hear my throat going already, can't you? So it was quite hard to engage with. And people didn't kind of adopt to it. So that's really why Teams was born, in all honesty. Teams is much easier to engage with. We've got apps for it. It's kind of much more streamlined. The user experience is much richer. So Teams kind of sits in front of SharePoint. But when you put a file in Teams, it actually goes in SharePoint. When you start to create Teams chats and bits and pieces, some of those chats are actually baked into chats within SharePoint site and within an environment. Okay, but SharePoint is carved up into typically departments, or to typically businesses, or whatever it is that works within your organization, all right? So when we go and look at SharePoint, today I want to focus on some of the things that aren't file related. So how do we get to SharePoint? Well, we click the little waffle, and you click on SharePoint, and this landing page is going to show you all of the sites that you have access to. Some of those will be your team sites, your Microsoft Teams sites. So we're going to create a new site. We get a choice. We have a team site or a communication site. Savvy amongst you will work out what a team site is. That's really based for collaboration with other colleagues, and yes, it will probably turn into a team site, right? But one option we do get is we get loads of templates. We can get to choose something. So I'm going to create a new recruitment site. Okay, so I'm going to choose a template that's to do with employee onboarding, just to make this a bit of a richer experience and it's not quite so boring. So recruitment, this thing's going to get an email address, all right, and it tells me there in green that recruitment at my organization is available. And I get a few options around security. I can either say that it's publicly available or private, which means that I only want people within, kind of set people to have access to it. If I set it to public, it actually means anybody in my organization, not necessarily everybody in the world. And then when we go away and we start creating this, whilst it will take a minute or two to build it, but I can add members and people that I want to have access to my site by adding them in as members here, okay? And once that's done, it's going to add the users in, it's going to go away and create me a lovely looking brand new SharePoint site. Now, this doesn't look like a folder system, does it? This looks more like a website at this point. And that's really the point of SharePoint. it's about collaboration. It's about surfacing up information. So you can see this site has got a video embedded in it. It's got blocks of text to the side. It's got various bits of information that are being surfaced up from underneath. Now, why would we want to do that? So lots of organizations will use SharePoint as an intranet, and that's very, very commonly seen. Okay, we see lots of organizations invest in third-party intranet platforms. SharePoint is actually a really good intranet. And what I mean by intranet is it's basically a website that's only available to you within your business. Okay, it's not publicly advertised. It can be, but typically it's not publicly advertised. It's there for your employees and for your team to understand. You might find that you've got very similar to a website. You might have a home page, and underneath that, you might have departmental pages. And I want to introduce to you the idea of an inner loop and an outer loop. All right. And if you start to use that terminology when you're looking up SharePoint, you'll get a much better definition than I'm going to give you now. But in a nutshell, an inner loop is the documents and the things and the chats and the resources that you use within your team. Okay. They're only really important to the people within your team. They're only really useful to the people within your team. And then you have this idea of an outer loop. Now, an outer loop are the documents that you share with other people in your organization, or maybe suppliers or people outside your organization. But the point is that if we go back to that idea of a network drive a few years ago, you used to go into the sales folder maybe, and there'd be loads of files in there, and you didn't really need everything. You just needed that one file that was about 5 folders deep, and you had to go into that folder, and then into that folder, and then into that folder, and you open that document. That was the one thing you cared about, right? But SharePoint allows us to cut all that navigation out, because I can just basically pin a document to our team's SharePoint intranet site. And if I make changes to that document, because it's linked to this page, it's always up to date. I just click on it. I can embed it even inside my SharePoint site. So it actually renders the document on a web page for me. So it allows us to kind of collaborate that stuff together. We've got lots of documents that we've got in our team site, which our department work on. And then what we might do is say, well, that document's useful for finance, and that document's useful for HR, and that one's perfect for our sort of senior leadership team because that's maybe board pack data. And you can surface and pull that information out and put it inside SharePoint so that people can get to it a bit easier. And another key thing is they can do it on any device as well, because it's a web page, right? And one thing every device has got in common is it's probably got a web browser. Well, it hasn't probably. I'll be surprised if it hasn't got a web browser, put it that way. So you can get to it through here. All right. You don't need Word installed, for example. So we've got this kind of blank looking page, all right, but it's not very useful to us. It's a template, for example. We want to customize this a little bit. So how do we do that? So you can see we've got a sub page under this called Meet the Team. Now, none of these people are our team, just to put that out there. It is a completely blank site. But if I come to the top right hand corner and I choose Edit, what happens is this web page turns into a drag and drop editable website builder. And you can, of course, use this to build your website if you choose to. There's probably better tools out there for an external website, but this is perfectly good for what we're doing internally. So, and you can see now that all the components, all the little text boxes and pictures and stuff, I can click on and start to make changes to, and I can edit. So I can click on a text box and overwrite it. I can choose that picture. It's not somebody that works for us, so let's get rid of that, and let's go and put a picture in of somebody else. So I can delete it, okay, and then whenever I hover, you'll see there's a little plus button. Okay, where I can put these little components in, and we call these web parts. Now I can choose pictures from all over the place. I can choose stock images. I can upload my own pictures. I could find a document or a picture of somebody that's stored within a SharePoint site or a Teams site somewhere. Okay, and I pick a picture and it just uploads it for me. Brilliant. And I could click underneath and start changing the text. And I can also fundamentally change the structure. So I can add sections. So effectively, I have a page. Page has lots of sections in it. And a section has lots of these little parts in it, which are pictures or blocks of text or whatever it is we're trying to modify, right? We can change the branding and the colors and all this sort of stuff. So if you use Wix or you've used kind of WordPress or any of these things to build websites, this is very similar. So when we go and add a section, you can see I get some choices about layout. I can have one column, which means it fits the whole width of the page. I can add 2 columns, which means that I can put 2 blocks of these components into SharePoint. But you can see how easy this is to do. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to get this kind of up and running. But when I go and add a plus, you can see lots of things that I can go and add in there. We've got banners and images and YouTube videos. We can add document libraries that just list out kind of a list of all the files in a particular folder. We've got things from Entra. Obviously, it's embedded in 365 and Planner and Power BI and Forms and all the other stuff that we're expecting to see, as well as embed codes. It's really actually quite powerful. But one thing we might want to do, since this is a HR thing, is add an organizational chart. So if I go and add an organizational chart widget and I choose Miriam, we know Miriam's a manager, bang, it automatically understands all the team that's underneath her. Right? I don't need to go in and keep updating my website when someone joins and leaves. Okay, it's just going to grab that information from 365. 365 understands who a manager is and who reports into who, as long as it's set up correctly. And at that point, it's just going to pull that data through. So as soon as a new starter joins and they're given a direct manager, that site's going to update, right? You're going to have visibility of it. It's all about using the data you've already got rather than trying to go out to a third-party application and make changes to a website that you've got as an intranet. It's about using the files you've already got stored inside SharePoint, the information about the relationships between people and how much they communicate and where they communicate and what they communicate over, what's important to them. Grab that data and surface that up into a department site. And then the department sites can all grab data that surface up into a site above that, which might be the homepage. Maybe it's your senior management site, and your senior management site is digging into each department and grabbing the board data, which they surface in their outer loop. So a little bit complicated, very difficult to cover in about 2 minutes, but you get the idea, okay? Very easy to use, drag and drop web kind of editor that allows you to get key information and share it out across your organization in a really rich environment. And it's web-based. That's the other key takeaway, is that it means you can get to it on any device. So let's continue along that trend. Something else that SharePoint does is creates lists. Okay, so this is probably something that might be new to a lot of people, and we'll go through this. It might be a little bit confusing, so we'll go through it at pace, but come talk to me if it gets confusing. But a list could be a list of anything. In this kind of scenario, we're going to use tasks. Okay, so again, I've got some templates here. This is a HR site, so it makes sense. Why don't we use a template of the employee onboarding, for example, template? But I can make these things from scratch, just for the benefit of time. I'm speeding this up, and I'm going to use this template. Now, imagine this a bit like an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, it's going to give me a load of rows and a load of columns, and I'm going to be able to type stuff in. Each list I create needs to have a unique name. So you can see here that we've already got one called employee onboarding. So I'm just going to change it and call it onboarding. And I can tick that little box there that says show in site navigation, which means it's going to come over in the side of the navigation of our SharePoint site if it's something we're going to use regularly. And you can now see that we've got an onboarding bit at the side, and we get this kind of table. All right, and the table's got lots of headings across the top: work, description, complete by, etc., etc. And if I go and add a new item, this is now going to effectively be a row in that table. So it asks me for various bits of information. So this is an onboarding thing. So I need to, let's pretend a new member of staff joining. We've got various tasks that we need to do. One of those might be to order a laptop. We need it done or complete by before the joining time. And we can assign it to a mentor in this scenario. It doesn't need to be a mentor, you call it whatever you want, but that's the person that's going to own this task. So in this scenario, it's Alex. And you can see that it's now put a record in to try and keep this terminology simple. That record could be anything, right? It could be a task, it could be a to-do, it could be anything that you need to create a list for, right? List of jobs that you've got to get done, get yourself organized with, whatever. But we can also add more and more columns, right? Now, we're not limited by what the templates put in there. The one thing that's missing is when do we actually need it done by, right? It's asking me when it's been complete and who's doing it, but it's not telling me when I need it done by. So I'm going to put a column in there on the end called completed by, right? And effectively, when I go back in, that little form that we were filling in a second ago is going to have a new value inside it called complete by, and I can start to record data against it. And really importantly, it knows it's a date time, gives me a nice handy little calendar view, so I can just pick a date rather than trying to type something in. I imagine these things exist across your organization in terms of spreadsheets and whatever, but they require people to type stuff in, and people make mistakes, right? So bear that in mind. So once we're happy and we've done that task, we can go and tick it and say it's complete, no problem at all. And you can see that we get a little tick box next to complete. And that allows us to open up things like views. So we've got lots of data. In Excel, you might filter that data and cut it in different, slice it in different ways. You can see here that I've just clicked group work by completed. Therefore, we've got a list of jobs that have been completed. And if I had any other jobs in there that weren't, I'd have a list of jobs that weren't completed, groups them together. So it allows me to have a long list of stuff and then slice and dice, very similar to the way Excel works. Probably the most powerful thing, you probably might have just missed it, but at the top there, it does say you can edit grid view. And what happens with grid view is it effectively turns into a spreadsheet. Now I don't need to click on a thing and bring up a form and type in lots of stuff. I can just click on a cell and type straight in it. So it's really no different to Excel at this point, but it's much smarter because at this time I'm not typing Alex's name in text. all right, I can type in someone's name and it will know that it's a person. All right. And when I choose a date, I'm not going to mistype the date. I'm going to pick a date from a date picker, and it's going to make sure the date is accurate that's going in. Okay. So if I wanted to add in a new task, so here we've got a new task of setting up the desk, for example, that's going to be for John Smith again, let's say. And then I can just click on the next cell. It's going to give me some options in there about one of those things need to be done. So it needs to be done before I join. This needs to be sorted out. I don't know when it's completed or when it certainly hasn't been completed. Don't know when it's going to be completed on at the moment. Adele is the user. Okay. Great thing about pinning an actual user account here is that person is going to see a to-do in their Microsoft 365 to-dos. Okay. They may even get an email, but we'll come on to that in a minute. And I've set a date of when they need to be done. Now, I can also export all these tasks out and shove them in Excel, which is really useful if I want to go a bit further and I want to do some real data analytics. I've got thousands and thousands of rows in here. Then that's definitely worth looking at as well. So very, very powerful. The last thing I want to show you is a board view. Okay, so think Trello, if anybody uses that. What I'm going to do is create a totally different way of looking at these lists of tasks. Now, obviously, you can't do this in Excel. So I'm going to create something called a board view. There's lots of different views in there. We'll talk about those in other sessions. But when I create a board view, what it does is it creates me these columns. We call those buckets. And all of the tasks that we had inside there are now little tiles within each bucket. And I can drag those tasks around. So you can see that as I drag that from before joining into the first week, you can see that the complete by field automatically changes for me and I can update it. I've decided to create this board and kind of slice it by the status or the complete by status, whether it's unassigned, whether the task needs to be done before joining first day, week, whatever. Of course, this could be by user. Each of the columns could have a user. They could be by a month. They could be by any of those fields that we've got inside our system, which allows me just to drag and drop these things around. So if you're used to using Planner, Microsoft Planner, basically very, very similar thing. In fact, if you think about it, Planner is kind of built on SharePoint as well, surprise, surprise. So, but if you use Trello, which is another kind of project management tool, this is a great way of just kind of dragging stuff around. It looks very, very similar. So think about it. You know, if you're doing a really large project, you're probably not going to be running all the tasks required for a SharePoint list. But if you're a team of a few users, or a few, 3 or 4 of you, or 2 of you in a team, you don't need a really expensive project management platform to manage your internal tasks, right? You could just use a board like this, and in fact, we do internally. So, we look at our tasks, and our consultancy team, for example, they've got various engagements coming up. We track those things in a board. We drag these things around because, of course, the world changes every now and then. Customers sometimes can't have us on site, or then things need to be pushed out, and we use these things to track that. It's nice and easy for our team to drag it around. And of course, it's web-based, so they can just do it on their phones, they can do it on their tablets, they can move stuff around without having to click in certain things and try and use their thumb with various stuff. So really, really useful. Okay, so lists are extremely powerful, right? Think about Excel, but kind of much more intelligent and embedded so much more into your 365 environment than you can ever get with Excel. So the next thing to say is data is only as good as the data you put in, okay? Or the data you get out is only as good as the data you put in. So it's really important to make sure we validate the data. And one way of doing that is to turn this list, rather than me typing all the information in, is to turn it into a Microsoft form. And there's a button at the top, if you missed it, which just says forms. You click on forms and it will generate you a Microsoft form with all those fields for this particular list. Okay, I can go and change some theming and whatever, but you can see there I've got questions for work and description and complete by, all the things that I would typically fill in to create a line inside this list. But I don't want to do that. Now, get a few options. I can choose notify me. It means if someone creates something, I'm still aware of it. But I don't want to type this data in. I want to delegate that and send it out to other people. So I copy the link for the form and I send that form off to somebody else. Okay. So we've got an onboarding task, no problem at all. Somebody else now is going to fill this information in. They're going to type that we've got to order a laptop again in this scenario. This might be for a different starter. So this time it's going to be for Jamie. And then we say, look, it needs to be done within the first week of them starting. Okay. Who's going to be doing that task? That's probably Alex again. So let's do Alex, no problem at all. And I submit it. Okay. Or when do we need it? I'm like, there, great, submit it. Perfect. Now, that's it. I haven't got involved in that point. So I didn't get an email saying, hey, can you set a task up? We've got a new onboarding thing. I need to create a load of stuff. Just send it to somebody else. Maybe someone in the HR team set that up. All right, maybe I'm in the IT side and I need to work out all the IT tasks I need to do. So we go back to our site, we give it a quick refresh, and you can see that that task is now listed underneath there. All right, so I don't need to sit here typing this in. I create a forms, get other people to fill that stuff in. The data all comes in, it aggregates the stuff together. I'm going to my board view, and I can start to move that task around and allocate it to people or site or change records inside it and get my team or myself organized. I personally use this for a lot of the things that I juggle within within my role here, and I'll slice and dice things by company. I'll slice and dice things by time. Just a list of the things that I'm trying to work on. Okay, so it is really useful both within the department, but also just personally for me. There is another tool called Lists, Microsoft Lists. Okay, basically the same thing, targeted more at a personal approach. So we'll cover that at a later date, maybe at some point. So very cool. Right. Another point to point out then, if we come in here, is that this is great if someone creates a record, but I might want to make sure that Alex absolutely knows that he needs to order that laptop. Okay, so one thing we do is create a Power Automate flow just by click of a few buttons. I can choose one of my tasks. If an item gets changed or modified or added, I can get a rule. When a new item is created, send an email to one of the fields in the record. That'd be the mentor. That's where Alex was. And it's going to go and create a rule that says whenever somebody adds a new record here, all right, to do something, whoever is the mentor is going to get an email saying this item's been updated. Here's all the information about the item, and you've been assigned this task. So quite a cool thing. You don't need Power Automate license to do that. That comes as part of your 365 environment. Again, Power Automate is all about workflow. It's all about streamlining stuff. And this conversation goes on further and further and further because we can bake into this things like approval processes. So when something gets changed, maybe you're ordering a laptop, all right? Well, before you can order the laptop, it needs to go to a manager to sign off that spend. So it might be that an email gets sent to that person, they approve it, and then that their response, their approval or reject, comes back to SharePoint and then carries the process on. So a lot of workflows baked into SharePoint. Probably too detailed to go into today in a quick guide, but we will cover it at some point in the future if it's of interest to you. Okay. Right. So that was OneDrive. It's all about your own personal stuff. SharePoint, exactly the same thing, but really for collaborative files and storage, but also some of the other bells and whistles. There's so much to SharePoint, and we could go on about it all day, and we haven't got enough time. But a few key things for you to go and explore and talk about. If you're one of our customers, when your consultant comes in and speaks to you, ask them about those things, okay, and understand how you can possibly bake some workflow through SharePoint or track data or track activity through SharePoint environment. Maybe you're looking at building an internal intranet and you want to surface information up without people having to go digging for it, then SharePoint's a great place to be looking at. So forms, we'll keep the pace. Microsoft Forms, a lot of you may have experimented with forms. What I wanted to do today was really just introduce you to how you create a form, what a template is. So apologies if some of you have already done this stuff, but it's worth checking anyway. So how to get the forms? Again, you go to your apps area. There'll be a tile there for Microsoft Forms. You go and choose that. And the first thing we're going to do is we've got a few options, all right, about the types of form we can create. We're going to focus on feedback today, but there is a registration form, a research form, and a quiz form, and they have slightly different roles. Okay, but in terms of a feedback form, when you create a new feedback form, it will give you down the side. We're focusing on templates today a bit for some reason, but we've got a whole bunch of templates. So this is going to be a feedback form for us getting information from our customers about how good we are at things. So I'm going to get a customer satisfaction survey template. The nice thing about doing a template is it's going to throw loads of questions in there, and you can get a feel for some of the types of things you can do inside Microsoft Forms. Right? So you can ask a question that requires a text box response. You can see you've got multiple check boxes in there. You've got star ratings. There's other bits in there as well with like uploading documents. Okay, loads of stuff that you can do within Forms. And think about how you use Forms. We're using it as a feedback survey, but you might be using it for other reasons. So once I've got my survey, I'm going to share it with somebody outside my organization. This is the URL. We go and basically send and collect responses at the bottom of the top. Really long URL, so you can just shorten it by ticking the little shorten URL box, and it becomes slightly shorter. Still not very attractive, is it? But it is shorter at least. And then, of course, if I wanted to, I could just send this out to a load of people. So if I pasted a whole load of email addresses in there, that'd be absolutely fine. So I'm going to send it to my email address. In this demo environment we're demoing with, I'm external to the business. So what will happen is if I try and send that to external, the error you might get will be that one, please remove external email address. Okay, and the reason for that is because on the other side, you can see that we've got it set to only people in Contoso, which is this demo environment, or the organization can respond. So I need to change that to anyone can respond, okay? I'm going to send it via Outlook and I'm going to hit send. And what will happen is that will then post off an email to my email account, okay, or to that to people outside your organization. And they will get a link to that form. They can go and open that up. It'll open in a web browser and they answer all your questions. The key information there is really that information is then aggregated all back into one place. It's definitely much more streamlined than sending out a Word document with loads of questions in and everyone receives 700 Word documents back and somebody's job is to then copy all that out of every Word document and put it in a spreadsheet. Or even if you're spending money doing this through things like Adobe, okay, then the PDF platform, again, you can make editable fields inside that. That information can be collated, but this information is going straight back into your 365 environment and ultimately ends up in a spreadsheet, which is really, really useful because that's pretty much where everybody tries to get their data back to. So just one thing again to point out is that your organization may block external and anyone can respond access through policy. So you may need to speak to your IT team about that if that is the case, okay? But please don't think that Forms is only really for getting external access in. It's a great tool, as you saw a minute ago with SharePoint, just for collecting data from departments within your organization. If you've got processes where people fill in forms within your business, this is really what Forms is powerful at, is making sure that the data that they're capturing, so if you've got a piece of paper today in the goods in or goods out process within your organization and people are filling in forms, and someone's taking that piece of paper and keying it into a system somewhere, then this is absolutely the answer. It will just collate that. You create a web-based form and they tick a few boxes and they type into it and it's done, right? And you can create automation and workflow and all the other stuff that's really, really cool off the back of it. Have that information stored straight into your CRM platform or into your management system, whatever it is you're using. So, and this takes us back to the idea of the good data that we want to see at the end is only good if the data that goes in at the user end is valid. All right. And if it's a piece of paper, it could be anything. If it's a spreadsheet or Word document, it could be mistyped. If it's a form, you've got rules in there to make sure that certain answers or certain questions have to be answered. If you put in a date, it's going to lock you down and make sure that the date you put in is a valid date and it's not the wrong date. And at a later time, you're looking at 10,000 rows of information that people have keyed in. I'm willing to bet there's going to be about 50 or 60 incorrect dates in there that you're going to sit there manually trying to fix. So great way of streamlining your processes. Right, so once we've sent the survey, this is what the end user would receive. All right, I've gone in and answered a couple of these. So you can see we've got radio boxes, we've got various options that I can have. We've got what we call a net promoter score there at the bottom, so we're going to go next. And then I can continue to answer these questions. Now, these are questions that have just come out of the template, obviously. And ultimately, if it was a business to consumer, if you're a business consumer organization, you might want to ask questions about the person potentially. If you're a business to business, you're probably much less likely to do that. But obviously, you can always put in just as a bit of encouragement, certainly when you start to ask sensitive questions, make sure you've got a prefer not to say option in there as a heads up. But obviously, you can also type bits and pieces. Now, an example of that validation that I was just talking about is that I've just tried to submit the form and it's telling me there, no, we're not going to take other as an answer. You need to actually give me a text answer, all right? So I can choose something or do a text answer, but it's going to stop me from submitting the form. It's going to stop me from submitting bad data because I've got validation baked into forms, all right? So I can't just get a blank answer, for example. It will require me to answer it. So once our response is submitted, brilliant, we can go back into Microsoft Forms and then we can go and view our responses. Now, this isn't particularly data rich. There's only going to be one response, which is going to be that one that I've just done. But what it does do is give you some insight into that response. Okay, so you can see there's been one response. It took on average 3 minutes and 16 seconds to respond. Obviously, we trimmed that video, just put it out there. And then we've got our answers to all our questions. So if you'd sent this to 100 people, this data is going to be much more interesting. Okay, what's the most, what's your favorite application? Teams in that example, right? It's going to surface some of that information and aggregate it together And of course, you can still export all of that data out, and you can go and shove it in Excel, and you can do even more data analytics around it. So Forms is really the de facto way of gathering data, whether that's from your customer or from your internal team members, and aggregating that stuff together. In fact, at the end of this, I believe we're sending out a feedback form. Yeah. So at the end of this video or this webinar, just so you get a feel for this, you'll understand. We're going to give you a little QR code, I think, and with a link to a form just to fill in, so where you can all tell me how rubbish I am at doing this stuff, right? So, but be honest about it. That's fine. But the idea is that you can go and get that customer satisfaction survey back. Great. But anything you do, anything where you need to gather or collect data, where you're using a form, anything you use a piece of paper for, try and use Forms for it, because it's honestly, it's going to make your life so much smoother, because you're not going to waste 3 days at the other end tidying data up. And that's probably the key takeaway. Right. Just to say, we created a template there. I just want to show you how easy it is to create a completely blank form. All right. So I've created a completely blank new form, no templates, nothing fancy here. We end up with a really kind of boring sheet. But basically, I just click on a box, I type a name. I'm going to create a Net Promoter Score survey here. So I'm going to go give it a type of NPS. I'm then going to say, right, I need to know your name. All right, I want to know who you are. So I'm going to ask you for your name, and I'm going to tick that box there to make sure it's required, which means you can't submit the form unless you put a value in that box. Then I'm going to add a Net Promoter Score widget, okay, which gives me that idea of between 0 and 10, how likely are you to recommend our services to a friend or colleague? And then I'm going to create a third question down here just by clicking that little plus, add new question, add new question, add new question. And then I'm going to create something called I think it's a liker, I don't know, something like that. But I'll let you tell me. But ultimately, this is where we get a grid, right? This is where we strongly agree or we strongly disagree, that kind of concept. So you'll see that at the end of lots of webinars and seminars and things like that. So the question is, why are we so good? Well, here's some of our answers. We can pop in there and say, I disagree. That's an option. Perhaps I agree. And you can see Forms being a little bit smart there at the top, right? I'm starting to type things. As soon as I click the next one, it's saying, look, I'm predicting the next thing you want is strongly agree. So it's giving me some options up the top. So, and then I probably don't need any more than that. Let's just delete the other options. No problem at all. Get rid of that. Get rid of option 5. All right. And then we've got some statements. So I need some things to actually agree or strongly disagree with. So what are the things that we are going to actually agree or strongly disagree with? Again, you can see all these things. It's just click and type, right? I haven't got to go in and edit forms and fill stuff in. Very easy to use, very quick to use. So why are we so good? Do you disagree, agree, or strongly agree that the speed of our service is great, our service is great, or is it our people, etc., etc.? Okay, wonderful. I've created in about a minute quite a decent little form that can now be sent out and sent to anybody in the world. I can give it a style and give it a theme, so I can change the background pieces. Remember, this can be used on any device. All right, that's really, really important. You're not sending out forms where people have to have a PDF reader and have to have a Microsoft Word to be able to fill it in. This is web-based. So again, any file, don't even need to log into it if you don't want your users to log into it. So we do have some options around the layouts and the styles and all that sort of stuff that you can see going on there. So I've picked one there that's got like a header section at the top of the form. Maybe I want to put some more information before you actually fill our form in. Maybe I want to tell you about this form and I want to explain to you what we're going to do with the data we collect and all that kind of stuff. Now I can preview it, and you can see that this is what the form will look like on a computer. So if I click start now, you'll see that that's the form. It's going to look like if I open it on a computer. But obviously one of the really cool things about forms is it's responsive. So that's what it's going to look like on a mobile phone if you try to answer it. And you'll see that those boxes at the bottom, rather than being little circles where I strongly agree and disagree, try and do that with your big fat finger. A bit difficult, so it turns it into proper boxes, which is a bit easier to do. Okay. And again, obviously, when we go and send that off to everybody, we have a few options. Again, we can shorten our URL, but we're going to the sharing URL. We can send it just people within our organization or everywhere. But another cool thing is that you can also turn it into a QR code by clicking that button there. So people can scan that with their phone and answer it on their mobile device. And you also have something called an embed link. That allows us to copy that string of HTML code and paste that into our website. So if you've got a feedback section maybe on your public website, you can just paste that piece of HTML into your website, and you will have an embedded form within your website. So they don't need to go to somewhere else to go and fill the form in. It might just say, hey, leave us some feedback, or maybe the form is contact us, all right, for a sales point perspective. So You have a website with your contact us with some information and the pictures of you and your business and follows your branding. And you have a really plain, white, boring form with no styling, just a white background with a bunch of questions in it. You embed that and it will appear like a form inside your website. But when users fill that in and they hit submit, that information is going to go into Excel, or it's going to go into SharePoint, or it's going to go and trigger a Power Automate flow that's going to send 6 emails off around the business or whatever you need to do. Try and go and get your web developer to build that solution. I'm sure it'll cost you lots of money. Okay, so this is all part of your 365 license as it stands at the moment. So very cool. Last thing to talk about, and then I'll let you go, is Sway. Okay, so Sway is kind of pitched as a digital story telling tool. It's very sort of sits a bit like Word, and it's a bit like PowerPoint. It's a bit of a strange one. I'll try and explain it and see if you can understand what the purpose is. It is worth saying that I think the longevity of Sway is probably waning. They have taken away embedded, or they've taken away uploading the videos. Now you've got to store them in SharePoint and things like that, by the way, if you do use Sway. So, but the idea of Sway is to basically take away a lot of the design element from me. Right? It's pretty good for creating web-based PowerPoint presentations, I would argue. Okay, or stories or marketing slides or anything like that. The way this works is you create a storyline. So you basically have these tiles. So I'm going to say, I'm going to create a product launch. So I start with a heading, all right, which is a product launch. And then I'm going to add underneath that, by clicking that little plus again, I'm going to add some pictures. So we're going to do a product launch of a computer. Fascinatingly interesting. I know you all just thought exactly what I thought. Aren't we glad we picked computers? So let's pick a cool computer. In fact, a really old computer. In fact, I had one of those many years ago, and they are Apple Macs. Okay, so Mr. Microsoft, I apologise for doing a Microsoft seminar and putting Apple Macs in it. But let's go and grab some text. Okay, so we're going to grab some information about this product launch, and I'm going to paste it into this text area down here. So I'm going to click plus and hit text. So you can see that first thing's a heading card. The one underneath it is just text. I'm going to grab some of that information out. All right, and depending on the type of card that I use, I can change the font within that card and bits and pieces. What we're going to end up in a minute is a website. All right, that's kind of where we're headed. So you can see that text is a bit bigger. All right, it kind of stands out as an article, should we say? I'm going to take that heading away, and we're going to slide up and go and add a new heading field in here. And all these cards slide around. I can move the order and I can change stuff. So let's paste that heading in there, and then we'll go and have a little look at what that looks like. So I've got a title, a heading, some pictures, another heading, and then some text. That's what I've ended up with right around my product launch. No problem at all. Right. So let's go away and take a look at the design element. Right. So there you go. Really exciting, isn't it? Now, what were you expecting with a computer? But it's pitch black screen. Looks like something I did in college many, many years ago when computers were first invented. But of course, I can glam it up a little bit and I can change it. Still looks like something that I did at college many, many years ago. So the design element is not brilliant, all right? I'm going to be honest with you. But in terms of an article, it doesn't look too bad, does it? It's the sort of thing you would actually have inside a newspaper, for example. But I can choose some more interesting ones, all right? If I'm a small business and I have no web development experience at all, and don't want to pay someone to go and build me a website, then this is actually a really good tool, okay? I can upload my own pictures, I can upload my own styles, I can set branding guidelines around the documents that I create inside Sway so that my text and my font is always a certain style, headings are a certain style, so that I literally just apply my corporate style and it all just spits out the way I want it to do. But the key here is it's a website. Again, it can be rendered inside a web browser, it can be read on any device, okay? A few options there around kind of layout as well, so you can say vertical scrolling when you scroll up and down like a website does. You can have horizontal scrolling, so it's easier on a tablet, for example. All right, or you can have slides, and the idea of that is kind of like a PowerPoint slide. So you can see as I arrow through that, I'm going to get the title, then the picture, and then a picture, and then that next title section, and then some of the text that went with it. So imagine if you were presenting that at a board, you could have some graphs and some data and some information, and everyone's got it on their devices. It's a much easier way to engage with than PowerPoint potentially. All right. If you're not into PowerPoint design, you just want something to look nice, you're great at writing text, but you can't design for toffee, then chuck your text in here and let it design something for you, all right? You will need to play with it. You also have that remix button that just keeps cycling around. It keeps predicting and coming up with ideas. The more text you put in there, the better, by the way. So if you are doing something on the Navy, let's say, you've got lots of pictures of battleships and loads of text about warships and things like that, the chances are the pictures that it will pick out in the background might be waves, and it's a little bit of AI going on in there. All right, but we've ended up with that extremely attractive, good-looking product launch brochure for our computer. Okay, so how do we share that? Effectively, same way we share everything in 365 when we get a sharing link. What you would probably do is grab that embed URL. So again, if you're using Wix, maybe a website designer like Wix, or you're using the GoDaddy website designer, or you're using WordPress, you can grab that piece of HTML, paste it in, and this becomes your website. All right, and it can be rendered on any machine. It can be looked at on a phone. It'll all be responsive and shift around. So it is actually quite powerful and quite cool on that front. All right. Another thing to say is you don't have to create it from scratch. Okay, you can just grab a Word document. So here we've got a Word document, Container Electronics, to open wherever that was. And this time I will go and start from a document rather than from scratch. So what I do is I go and give it the document that we just looked at a moment ago, that Word document. And what it will do this time is, rather than me having to type all that text in and muck around with cards and position things about the way I want to position it, I can simply go and give it that file, and it will kind of pull in all the information from the document for me. All right, so Container Electronics, open the Miami store, press announcement, there's an image card, there's a header card, there's some text. Don't really need for immediate release, so I can always go and get rid of that and click on it and just choose delete. All right, wonderful, happy with that. And then once we're pleased, we can go over to our design, and there we go. So it actually took me about 5 seconds to create something that looks a little bit better than my Word document did. And also, whoever I send it to doesn't need Word to read it now, do they? They can just open it on anything. They can open it on their Google phone, their Android phone. They can open it on a Chromebook. They can open it up on iOS, whatever it is. It's just a web browser now. So there are some huge advantages and reasons why you might want to convert static documents into web-based articles, web-based content, so they can be read all over the place. And that's probably the takeaway from everything you've seen today. You know, OneDrive is a web-based version, very, very powerful. SharePoint, it's all about surfacing documents up into web environments, because the main point is every device you've got has got a web browser. So why not use it in a web environment, and then every device you use can engage with your corporate data potentially, assuming you've got policy and Intune and various other bits and pieces before I get shouted at. Right, so well done. Thank you very much, everybody. That was a kind of a deep dive, or a quick overview, I should say. It definitely wasn't a deep dive. Quick overview of all the things that we've got within some of these applications. Where to learn more? Obviously, there is lots of Microsoft training. There are obviously the webinars and the blogs and all the things that we do. Obviously, I encourage you to reach out and speak to us about some of this stuff. Obviously, my particular favourite, Copilot. I'm starting to love Copilot more and more every day. I'm not going to lie, it gets extremely powerful. So go and ask Copilot. If you haven't got Copilot, go and open up your Edge browser, click on the little Copilot icon and type in corner and just say, how do I do this in Slay? How do I do this inside Forms? It will give you the answers. It will point you in the right direction. Right, we've got a few questions. Let me have a little look. Let's have a little look. Right. Just going through. Right, how does a site differ to channels in Teams? Great question. Right, so effectively, the truth is that they're basically the same thing. So if you create a team site, what you'll find actually in SharePoint is that you'll have a SharePoint environment. A channel, what happens with a channel is it effectively becomes a folder in your folder system. So if you create a team called projects, let's say, all right, and then within Teams, so creating a projects team would create a projects SharePoint site behind the scenes. When you then create a channel inside it, what happens is in the root document library where all your files are stored, it creates a new folder effectively for where all your documents that you drop in Teams are going to go in. So if you looked at the root folder in SharePoint, you'd see projects team, and then underneath it would be channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, but they're just folders. Right? They're not necessarily sites of their own. They're not pages that exist within SharePoint site. They are just folders with data that you store inside Teams. Second to that, it's worth saying though, when you create a private channel, so rather than a public channel that everyone's got, if you go and create a channel that only certain people in that team can see, that does break out into its own site, into its own SharePoint site. So it's a little bit complicated, but I'm happy to sit down and have a chat with you if you want to go through that. Somebody else has said, so we're using Excel sheet published as our intranet page with our links, etc. It looks like SharePoint may be a way to do that. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that is a really common example of where you can bubble that stuff up. Because who wants to go to Excel, to open Excel, to click on a web link, to then open up a web browser, when you can just go to a web browser and click on the link and it just takes you to the page. So absolutely makes sense. So, but importantly, you can create a list. There's nothing, you don't have to retype all those links in. You can just embed that spreadsheet inside SharePoint if you want, and then all your links are there. So you can just click on them and they'll open up a web browser. Can you convert a Word document into form? Sadly not. No. So sadly not. That is the answer to that one, I'm afraid. So I have seen ingenious third-party tools that can do some of that stuff, but as it stands at the moment, not easily, I'm afraid. If you've got Copilot, you can certainly. I might try this out. I'll let you know how it goes. But if you've got Copilot, you might be able to go and say, "Hey, have a look at this Word document, create me a forms." That might work, but I haven't tried it, so I'll give it a go and let you know. Is Sway likely to be around in 3 to 5 years? Good question. 3 years, yeah. 5 years, maybe not. It's probably going to be better solutions. I think Sway will evolve. I think a lot of the things that were really cool about Sway a year or two ago are starting to be now put into PowerPoint. It hasn't actively had a huge amount of update and change in the last sort of 24 months or so. So I think it possibly may go. So if you use Sway already, probably worth thinking about alternatives and what you might want to change to. And that really, I know we're covering it today and we're talking about it. I'm not saying don't go and use it, but it's important that some of our customers do use Sway or have used it. I think you'll always be able to view a Sway, so don't worry about that. You'll always be able to open up and render it, but you might start to see the ability to create Sways disappear. All right. Right, we have encountered a lot of problems with directory level sharing with external users in SharePoint due to inconsistent behavior once the permission inheritance is broken. Yeah, okay. To avoid this, we switched to only sharing at a site or document library level. This is less flexible. Do you have any tips for avoiding issues with sharing with external users while still allowing directory level permissions management? Right, do you have any tips for avoiding issues with sharing with external users whilst allowing directory level permissions management? Right, I get you. So you're absolutely right. What Andy's asking me there basically is, in the old days, when we managed for the slightly more technical list, but for the people that are technical on the call, traditionally we always use NTFS permissions. And Andy, I think this is what you're asking me, so tell me if I'm wrong. But we always had something called NTFS permissions, which meant that the files that were in the folder are all subject to the permissions that were on the folder. That changes when you move stuff to the cloud, okay? Because now the only real permissions that we've got baked into Teams is the permission within a channel or within a site. So we say these people can access this team site and these people can access this channel, but they then have the ability just to access all the documents that are underneath it. Unless you go into the back end of SharePoint and explicitly say, this folder is only available to certain people, and this folder is only available to certain people, and this folder is only available to certain people. The problem with that is that that's kind of the on-premise mentality of how we manage files and folders rather than the cloud-based mentality of how we do it. There is a service called Azure Information Protection Services, which shifts that idea away from being all about the permissions at a folder level. It's about the permissions being at a file level. So what you can do is you can label. You have things called sensitivity labels, very similar to DLP policies that you'll see inside 365 if you're technical. And what that allows you to do is put permissions on a file itself, where you say, this file can only be accessed by these people. This file can only be opened on a corporate company device. This file cannot be printed. This file cannot be saved on a USB key. This file can only be viewed but not screenshotted in some kind of scenarios, right? You can even encrypt it and stop that. You can put watermarks over it. There's a whole change in the way that we manage permissioning. What that means is if your permission is set at a level where it's based on the file, you can pretty much open up Teams a bit more. So you can say, well, anybody can have access to Teams within reason. We want to allow third party. It's even better for third party because you can say, we want to allow people into our environment, but they're only going to be able to see documents that we have labeled as third party or public. Maybe you've got a confidential label, maybe you've got an internal label, and then maybe you've got a public label, right? Third parties can only see public items that are labeled as public, right? You set that all stuff up inside SharePoint, you set it all up inside Intune if you're using that, and then within Azure. And then ultimately, even if they get into your environment, they can only see certain documents. So that might be another approach. I'm not saying it's the right approach, Andy, but if you want to reach out and have a chat with us about it, I'm happy to give you a demo how that works. Right. Any more questions? Thank you. I love Copilot too. I agree. So do I. Anyway, I totally agree. I'm glad to see you all using it. So, right, any more questions? If not, you are free to go. Thank you very much for your time. So we're running about 2 minutes over. But I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining me again. I managed to get through, even with a dry throat. I'm going to be quiet for the rest of the day now, I think. So, but much appreciated. Take care and see you all later on.